Good evening, everyone. Welcome to NTD Tonight. I'm David Zhang. Here are today's top stories. President Biden visits key battleground states and vows to stay in the presidential race. Voluntary evacuations are underway as the Silver King fire continues to grow in Utah. Record heat bakes Death Valley National Park. Visitors share how it feels to stand in over 120-degree temperatures. First up, President Biden visits key battleground states and vows to win re-election. Takeaways from events in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. And a look at what's next on Biden's campaign trail. President Biden is vowing to stay in the presidential race amid criticisms over his debate performance. He wrote a letter to congressional Democrats today as lawmakers return to Capitol Hill. In the letter, Biden wrote, quote, "I want to know that despite all the speculation in the press and elsewhere, I'm firmly committed to staying in this race and to running this race to the end." The president also urged the unity among Democrats and warned against any weakening of resolve. Earlier this morning, Biden told MSNBC's Morning Joe program, quote, "I'm not going anywhere." Biden also expressed frustration with what he called an effort by elites to force him out of the presidential race. Democratic House members are set to hold a caucus meeting with the Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries tomorrow. A judge in former President Trump's classified documents case has granted a pause on some deadlines. Trump's lawyers asked to argue the merits of the Supreme Court's immunity decision on Friday. Judge Eileen Cannon granted a temporary stay on 3 pending deadlines in the case on Saturday. Judge Cannon is giving Trump's attorneys and special counsel Jack Smith's team more time to file additional briefs. Trump's brief is due on Thursday. Smith's brief is due next Thursday. Trump's legal team has until July 21st to reply. Trump has pleaded not guilty. No trial date has been set. Over 1 million customers are without power in Texas, and over 1,000 flights have been canceled nationwide. Hurricane Beryl made landfall in South Texas as a Category 1 storm earlier this morning around 4 a.m. Beryl made landfall around 85 miles southwest of Houston, with winds up to 80 miles per hour. The National Hurricane Center is warning of potentially life-threatening storm surges, flash floods, and wind gusts. 121 Texas counties are under a disaster declaration. A man in Harris County was killed after a tree fell onto a house. According to CenterPoint Energy, over 1.7 million customers are without power. The hurricane is also disrupting travel. According to flight tracking website FlightAware, airlines in the U.S. canceled more than 1,300 flights and delayed over 1,000 today. The National Weather Service expects Beryl to weaken to a tropical storm later today and a tropical depression tomorrow. It's likely to move over eastern Texas and then through the lower Mississippi Valley into the Ohio Valley by Wednesday. NATO and its member countries are preparing for a major summit in Washington this week. The annual meeting between members marks its 75th anniversary this year. Heads of state from around the world are arriving in Washington today. D.C. is hosting the NATO summit for the first time in 25 years. Ukraine will be a major topic. NATO Chief Jens Stoltenberg told reporters on Sunday the alliance will create a new command post in Germany. A 3-star NATO general will head the post with the 700 personnel stationed there. The new command is scheduled to take over the Ukraine Defense Contact Group. That's an alliance with 50 members which handles international support for Ukraine. NATO will also establish pledges among its members to sustain current Ukraine support for at least another year. Stoltenberg says the new command and the pledges will bring NATO and Ukraine closer to each other. Federal officials have authorized emergency funds to combat the expanding Silver King fire in Utah, which has scorched nearly 11,000 acres in Piute County. NTD's Christina Corona has the latest details on the story.
The Federal Emergency Management Agency approved Utah's request for fire management assistance late Sunday as the Silver King fire continued to spread near Marysvale. Voluntary evacuations were issued for areas near the fire on Saturday, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency determined that the blaze posed a significant threat that could escalate into a major disaster. According to the latest update from the Utah Department of Natural Resources, the fire has burned over 10,800 acres since it ignited on July 5th. The Great Basin Predictive Services highlight the rising ERC percentiles across the region, indicating increasingly hot and dry conditions persisting over a prolonged period.
Looking at southern Utah, where we had another large fire develop yesterday, ERCs are already above the maximum, as you can see by the blue line, and the forecast keeps them well above maximums for the next several days.
Officials report that relative humidity will remain in the single digits across the lower elevations of Utah.
And you can see from our wind picture, we will have some breezy winds still over southern Utah and the Arizona Strip, especially western areas. However, these wind gusts out of the north or northwest will generally be in the 20s to around 30 miles per hour.
The fire initially began in the Beaver Creek drainage area of Fish Lake National Forest on Friday afternoon following a lightning strike. Officials have reported that nearly 300 residents in Marysvale are at risk from the wildfire. The federal grant will cover 75% of eligible state firefighting expenses, including equipment use, field camps, and supply purchases. However, this program reimburses expenses but does not provide direct aid to property owners affected by the fire. As of now, no injuries have been reported and the fire remains 0% contained. Christina Corona, NTD News.
The summer heat wave is upon us, and while most people try to stay indoors and as cool as possible, others are venturing out to one of the hottest places on Earth. Let's hear why they chose to visit Death Valley in the summer.
A long-running heat wave that has already shattered previous records across the U.S. persisted on Sunday. It baked parts of the West with dangerous temperatures.
Yeah, so the official weather station, it is shielded from radiant heat, so it's not really in direct sunlight. It has to be at least 6 feet off the ground and away from any buildings. And so that will give you the most accurate representation of what the ambient air temperature is. The thermometer outside, it's in direct sunlight, it's pretty close to the building, so it's getting more radiant heat. So it does tend to be about 1 to 5 degrees warmer, particularly during the summer, during these hottest days. It will run a little bit hotter than the official weather station.
Officials say temperatures reached 128 degrees Fahrenheit on Sunday. People from all across the world visited the national park to experience the heat for themselves.
Do you know how many people warned me about coming here this weekend? But to say that it's a record high, that's cool. That's one for the books.
It's worse than an oven. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like an oven. It's like walking in the oven. Or you open the oven after 350.
Yeah.
It's in the face.
How fortunate we are that we have the luxury of air conditioning and cars, but it's fascinating. The whole landscape, it's speechless yet.
The heat caused the death of a motorcyclist in Death Valley.
It is a dry heat, but that dry heat is pretty intense. So when you step out of your vehicle, it's like stepping your entire body out into an oven. It's just baking, and particularly when you're at these higher temperatures on 125, 100, and potentially 30, there's no mistaking how hot it is. You start to feel it on your skin, in your eyes. They start to dry, start to almost hurt a little bit over time. So it is quite the experience, and so that's why we really recommend that visitors minimize their exposure if they're coming to Death Valley in the summer.
The park reminds people to not hike after 10 a.m., drink plenty of water, and that cell phones do not work in most of the park. Most of the U.S. West can expect temperatures to reach 100 to 120 degrees this week. Over 45 million people are under heat alerts, including nearly all of Washington, Oregon, and California. About 29 million of them are under excessive heat warnings.
We'll take a short break now, everybody, but here's a look at what we have for you when we come back. After 2 years since the burn pit law that benefits veterans was passed, some say there is progress in helping military families. The U.S. Coast Guard rescues boaters clinging to an overturned vessel in Florida. Vegan food on the menu at West Hollywood City's meetings and events. More on the new policy. Those stories and more coming up on NTD Tonight. Welcome back to NTD Tonight. I'm your host, David Zhang. Military veterans can be exposed to toxins and other hazards during military service. It's been 2 years since an expansion on health care benefits for veterans. Here's my conversation with NTD's David Lam for more on the laws and what's next. David, good to see you. What do you know about veterans waiting for benefits?
It's good to see you too, David. So it's gotten a lot better in terms of claims and support. Now, some veterans may have been exposed to a range of chemical, physical, and environmental hazards during military service. It's one of the potential dangers depending on their jobs. And to help veterans who may have been affected and their families, the Veterans Affairs Agency has processed more than 1 million claims since the PACT Act passed, and it approved about $5.7 billion in benefits to veterans and their surviving families. But veterans still face difficulties getting their benefits.
What is the PACT Act?
The PACT Act passed in 2022, and it's called the Sergeant First Class Heath Robinson Honoring Our Promise to Address Comprehensive Toxics Act. The PACT Act expands health care and benefits to veterans exposed to open burn pits, Agent Orange, and other toxic substances. Now, the Department of Veterans Affairs said in March that it's expanding health care to millions of military veterans.
Now, how do veterans get exposed to those substances you just mentioned?
Well, for years during deployments throughout the Middle East and parts of Africa, the U.S. military used open-air burn pits to dispose of plastics, electronics, and medical waste. The military also used Agent Orange, which is a chemical spray used during the Vietnam War. It was a herbicide which was used to control vegetation strategically during the war. The group Burn Pits 360 was at the forefront of getting the act passed. Retired U.S. Army Reserve Captain Leroy Torres and his wife, Rosie Lopez Torres, formed Burn Pits 360 after Mr. Leroy returned from a 2007 deployment to Iraq with difficulty breathing. He was diagnosed with medical conditions, and they had challenges getting the VA, Veterans Affairs, to accept their claims.
And what challenges did they face?
Since the PACT Act passage, Veterans Affairs recognized connections to 23 cancers and respiratory illnesses for veterans. And before this, there was troubles in linking his illnesses with military service. And so some people had issue with getting claims for constrictive bronchiolitis, which affects breathing. Now, the current policy may not allow, in some cases, the diagnostic to be combined with other respiratory conditions to determine a higher disability rating. The condition is considered service-connected, but some people may not get compensation for it. The Veterans Affairs Secretary previously said the severity and invasiveness of the test of the lung biopsies is too invasive.
Well, I know there is complexity in how to measure illnesses in military service. So what's next, David?
Well, some lawmakers have been urging VA to expedite a new disability rating guide regulations for constrictive bronchiolitis. Now, some also want more coverage for illnesses that veterans face.
Thank you so much, David.
Thank you, David.
5 individuals were rescued by the U.S. Coast Guard after their boat capsized approximately 11 miles off the coast of Florida. NTD's Christina Corona tells us more.
The Jacksonville Command Center sent a Coast Guard boat and helicopter crew at 10:15 a.m. Sunday after being informed by the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office that a 24-foot vessel had overturned, leaving its passengers in the water. Upon arrival, the Coast Guard boat crew found 5 men on top of the capsized boat, all wearing life jackets. The men were safely brought aboard the response boat and transported back to the Mayport boat ramp in Jacksonville, Florida. The Coast Guard released images from the rescue operation, including a photo of the men being greeted on shore by their families. Officials report that the vessel was left adrift and the owner will organize its salvage. No injuries were reported and the cause of the capsizing is under investigation. Christina Corona, NTD News.
Boeing has agreed to plead guilty to a felony charge stemming from 2 deadly 737 crashes overseas. But the victims' families say the deal is a slap on the wrist. NTD's Sam Wang has the details.
It's been a tumultuous year for Boeing. After a month under investigation, the aviation giant on Sunday agreed to plead guilty to conspiracy to defraud the United States. The charge traces back to 2 fatal crashes of the Boeing 737 MAX in Indonesia and Ethiopia several years ago, which led to the death of everyone on board. Now the Justice Department is demanding that Boeing pay an additional fine of $243 million, plus invest nearly $500 million in the company's compliance and safety programs. But no word yet on accountability for the deaths of hundreds of travelers.
I will never get a chance to see, hold, hug, kiss, and hear my daughter's voice ever again.
The plea deal is already receiving blowback from the victims' families, many of whom have vowed to oppose it. It comes after a 2021 settlement between the Justice Department and Boeing. The company avoided prosecution after the 2 crashes by promising to ramp up its safety controls. But DOJ said Boeing breached that agreement by deceiving regulators. This year, Boeing has faced scrutiny over its quality controls. It received widespread attention after a door plug blew off midair on an Alaska airline flight back in January. Under pressure, the company has since announced a string of leadership changes, including news that its CEO David Calhoun will step down at the end of 2024, a demand that lawmakers have long called for.
I'm proud of having taken the job. I'm proud of our safety record, and I am very proud of our Boeing people.
You're proud of this safety record, and I think the American public, when they fear to get on their airplanes, they understand your safety record. And frankly, sir, I think it's a travesty that you're still in your job.
Just recently, a former Boeing inspector alleged that scrap parts were used on the assembly lines at a factory in Everett, Washington. Aside from commercial flights, Boeing's contracts with the federal government make up a large portion of its revenue. The latest plea deal will likely trigger more legal disputes going forward. Sam Wang, NTD News.
In Southern California, one trendy city known for its nightlife, fashion, and unique architecture has just adopted a new vegan policy. Moving forward, at city-sponsored events and meetings, when food is served, it will be vegan with some exceptions. We'll turn to NTD's Bill Thomas to find out more.
Mercy for Animals, a Los Angeles-based international nonprofit organization, recently lobbied the city of West Hollywood to serve vegan foods at city-sanctioned gatherings, but if requested by those in attendance, the city will also provide meat products. Founded in 1999, the mission of Mercy for Animals is to help bring an end to inhumane factory farming. As a result of the work they've done over the last quarter of a century, they tell us they've helped save the lives of countless number of animals all over the world.
Our mission is to end industrial animal agriculture by constructing a just and sustainable food system. Our vision is a world where animals are respected, protected, and free.
Alex Arusi, the senior state policy manager with Mercy for Animals, shares with us the great lengths her group goes to in an effort to protect animals.
Mercy for Animals conducts legal undercover investigations, for example, to expose some of the most egregious cruelties that animals face on factory farms. Mercy for Animals also works alongside farmers who are looking to transition from factory farming to more humane methods of farming. And Mercy for Animals also works on corporate and public policy.
Getting the city on board with this new program was fairly easy because they had strong support from their residents.
Fortunately, this policy is something that the actual community of West Hollywood wanted to see the city do. So we didn't have very many hurdles to overcome. Community buy-in is an absolute essential, must-have when pursuing these kinds of policies.
While this success was relatively straightforward, there were other times when her organization had to work a bit harder to accomplish their goals.
Sometimes I do have to spend extra time raising awareness about the impact that the current food system has on the environment before actually moving forward with, drafting and working on an actual piece of legislation.
There's never a shortage of steaks, ribs, chicken, and more for diners in West Hollywood. The aromas, flavors, and textures can be intoxicating. Fortunately, though, for those who still can't immediately get over their desire to consume animal products, vegan fare at city events is merely an option.
So this policy preserves freedom of choice. Anyone can get the kind of food that they would like, but it does prioritize and promote healthier, more sustainable food options.
In addition to West Hollywood, Mercy for Animals recently achieved another major accomplishment with an even larger government agency.
One other recent victory we had was actually at the county level in Los Angeles, very similar to the West Hollywood policy, but for Los Angeles County. It's a really huge win for the environment, for the animals, and for people's health. And if people would like to find out more, they can visit mercyforanimals.org/policy.
West Hollywood city officials claim that plant-based meals have on average a 63% lower carbon footprint than animal-based meals. The city also says that they'll prioritize purchasing plant-based foods from locally owned businesses whenever possible. Bill Thomas and Jimmy Ma, NTD News, West Hollywood.
Stay tuned for China in Focus with Tiffany Meyer coming up next. Critical developments as a flooding batters China. An emergency breach in the embankment guarding China's second largest freshwater lake. Plus, villagers seen banding together to rescue a 90-year-old. More on China in Focus with Tiffany Meyer at 9:30 p.m. Eastern. And that's all we've got for you tonight. We'd like you to join us again on NTD Tonight every weekday at 9 p.m. I'm David Zhang. Have a wonderful evening.